Both scissors.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Scissors.
Dang it! Okay.
I beat her with
You
paper. The world feels chaotic and dark right now, and we want to bring a little light. So each week, we'll talk about a book we've read or are reading and our biggest takeaways. Maybe something we've learned, an aha moment, an inspiration, or simply how we've been entertained or encouraged or surprised by the plot. It'll just be a casual, down-to-earth chat between two book-loving best friends. Welcome to the Bookfluencer podcast.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Bookfluencer podcast.
Welcome, welcome. I am Tiffany.
And I'm Shannon.
And today we've got a couple new books for you. Shannon, what are you talking about today?
I think we're talking about 2 fiction books, right?
We
both read fiction
are.
this time. Holy moly. That never happens. I am talking about Frederik Bachman's The Winners, which is actually the third in his Beartown series. What are you talking about?
I am talking about These Impossible Things by Salma El-Wardany. Now, I apologize if I'm pronouncing her last name incorrectly. It is spelled El-Wardany, so it could be Wardany, El-Wardany. I'm not positive, but
we make no promises about pronouncing things correctly. All we can guarantee is that we spell them correctly because we are journalists / writers.
Yeah.
And, morphing into this whole podcast thing. So,
yeah.
just a caveat. All I need to know is how to spell it is usually what I say in a professional capacity.
Yeah. I thought about going on, you know how sometimes they'll have
the pronunciation on LinkedIn or something?
Yeah, but I didn't check. I should have.
Happens. And we'll figure it out. Maybe we'll have a listener and they'll let us know how to pronounce it. Wouldn't that be exciting? Do you want to go first? Should we rock, paper, scissors for it?
Oh, yeah, let's rock, paper, scissors. We've not done that before.
Okay, ready?
Mm-hmm. Both scissors.
Rock, paper,
scissors.
Dang it! Okay.
I beat her with paper.
Won. You get to pick.
I'll go first. Alrighty, so I read These Impossible Things. A quick little anecdote about this. I bought this book a couple weeks ago when I went to like a local indie bookstore in Chapel Hill, and I was browsing, I was picking up a bunch of things, and this one, just the synopsis of it caught my attention. It has a really bright like cover of the book with some black lines on it. And when I was walking, I parked really far away from the bookstore. So I was walking back to my car, holding the book, eating some frozen yogurt because it was a beautiful day and I was just living my life. And I kept getting some glances from people, and it's like, okay, maybe, I don't know, maybe they like my sunglasses or whatever, feeling silly. But I noticed like more eyes than I normally would if I was just moving through the world. When I got home, I realized that the black lines on the cover are actually like the silhouette of a woman's body. So it was like breasts and, the curves. It's not like,
like a pinup girl on like,
yeah, but like not so obvious, at least for me, that I could see what it was. But I was like, of course they're staring at me because they see this like naked woman, not an actual naked woman, but the silhouette of a naked woman on this book. So anyways, I laughed that I was like, people are just looking at me bopping down the street. But no, they're looking at the naked woman on your book. So anyways, but when I realized that, I was like, oh, that makes sense given what the book is about. So,
which is
These Impossible Things. Yeah, so it follows 3 female best friends. And it starts when they're like all sort of wrapping up their collegiate experience. And they're in this like little pod of perfection, right? Like it's springtime and 2 of them are with their boyfriends and one of them is single at the time, but like living her best life, doing her thing. And they're all kind of like, this is how it's supposed to be. And then it sort of like slowly dawns on them, like we're graduating, we have to get real jobs, life is going to change, but we're going to ignore that for now. Like we're just going to lay here in the grass and
That's
look at
how
the
I did it.
clouds. Yeah. And, pretend that future isn't upon us. So as the story, another important note, all of the women are Muslim and their families are Muslim. So they're not, I think at least two of them, I'm not sure, might be from mixed families, or maybe one of them is. I should double check that. So like they're not 100% like Pakistani or Egyptian or, whichever country their families originated from.
Mm-hmm.
But nonetheless, their faith is Islam. And so that's a huge thread throughout the book because it's such, the author really goes into these expectations placed upon these women to marry a Muslim man. And that's kind of like the thread that runs through the book. So like at the beginning of the book, two of the women are in relationships with white men, and their families have no idea that they're in these relationships. They've been dating these men for years, but they can't say anything because they will essentially be ostracized from their families.
Okay.
And so the real action starts when one of those relationships ends because the woman is like, I can't do this. Like, you know what I mean? So it follows their friendship experiences some cracks because they're starting to make decisions that are pulling them apart from one another. One of them ends up moving away because she just feels drawn back to the country where her family is from, and she needs to go to like live this new part of her life. And another one kind of pushes through in the same situation that she's in and tries to reconcile the fact that she's in love with a man that her family will never accept. And another one holds these values really dear, but toes the line between, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Honoring her faith and like living in the way that she wants to live. In terms of, the example is like, she believes that no Muslim man will accept her if she's not a virgin when they get married, but she does every other sexual thing you could possibly do without actually having like vaginal intercourse. Do you know what I mean? Like,
so almost like her values are in conflict with the values that she was brought up with, and this is like how she's choosing to navigate that.
Yeah, almost like this technicality, this loophole is what will allow me to actually live as who I truly am, but not like break the rules of my faith so that my family will still accept me and my future husband will still accept me. And I loved, okay, I'm going to go to our document, Shannon, because I actually wrote some things down this time.
Woohoo!
Here we go. So one, this everlasting bond of female friendship. Like, there are times in the book where these women don't speak to one another and they don't know how to speak to one another because their lives have gone in different directions and they don't know where each other fits anymore.
Sure.
And during this time, each of them is almost, they're like wrestling with their own form of this confusion and dissonance with how they want to live and how they believe they should live and how their families want them to live and how their families believe they should live. And it's all like the same fight that they're fighting, but it just plays out in completely different ways for each of them. And I love that those struggles happen for them like when they're alone, because it just emphasizes like they all realize when they're alone that they need these other women, but because of these cracks that have surfaced, they don't feel like they can reach out and get in touch with those people who would help them through this. So it's
right.
It's cool. Like, I don't know, it's just very real, right? Like I feel like all of us have kind of experienced that.
those personal struggles, you feel very individual and you feel very isolated when you're in your head about them. And it's not until you're able to like really zoom out and realize that you're one of like 6 billion people on the planet, and the odds of you being the only one who feels like this are slim. You're not special, as
Yeah.
I'm reminded so often. So
And she points out through their experiences that like when you isolate and when you become an island, you can get trapped in situations because you're convincing yourself this is okay, this is right, this is where I should be. Whereas if you had other people looking in to reflect back to you, or even just to validate your experience, you might make different choices, or you might be able to see things through a different lens. So when it's only you in your own head and you don't have those outside voices that you trust, right? Not just any outside voices. It can just make things exponentially worse. And that's what happened for these three.
yeah, we need community, humans.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's part of the reason why the characters were so distressed about these like relationships and how they were going to, like, if they were going to allow themselves to continue to love men who weren't Muslim, or if they were going to try to find a Muslim man, because their families were such big communities. Like they all still lived in the same house, and it was common that you lived in that house until you were married and went to your own house. And all the weddings, like they had tons of aunties and uncles, right? Everybody's an auntie and an uncle. And so the women longed for that community, and that idea of having people surround you in whatever you were going through was strong enough that they were willing to give up some of these other things that they desired, because that feeling of community they didn't want to lose.
Yeah, and I mean, those are decisions that we all make as adults, right? Another turn of phrase that you used earlier was saying that these awesome women just were making decisions that took them away from each other. And while that is true, is it true that they intended for them to be taking them away from each other? Probably not, but both end up being true, right? Decisions that I make or decisions that you make could take us further away from one another. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that was the intention. You just have to weigh the pros and cons of everything and, make the decision of what you can live with.
Yeah, and I think right there, that's the piece, is like what the decision one of them could live with was a decision that the other was opposite of the decision
Right.
another one made that they could live with. And so they could no longer see, it was almost like one of them was like jealous and resentful because she felt like she should be making the decision the other one did. And the
Sure.
other one was jealous and resentful because she wished she could be making the decision the other one did. So it's like they made these
This is where
decisions,
you
but
can't compare, it's like,
yeah.
okay, that, we have very similar situations, sure, but like, I don't know what's in her heart, to at the end of the day. And you have to let people walk their own path, but trying to put what you've done or what somebody else has done on what I might do, that's just never going to work out for you. You know what you should do.
And I think the piece for them was that neither of them was really confident or secure in the decisions they were making, even though it felt right to them. And so to see somebody else making a different decision almost made them question. And so that caused like anger and resentment, which caused, fightings and rifts in the relationship. But the theme throughout is just this pressure to meet expectations of faith, culture, and family. And I could just really relate to that, even though like the faith that I have looks a lot different than the faith that these women have in terms of the cultural values that are associated with it. But all of the decisions they made were weighed based on these external expectations. of
Yeah.
who they should be as women and what it meant to live right, or what it meant to have, like an honorable life or
Right.
existence. It was like heartbreaking at times to read, because a lot of times these women, like, they kept up their faith practices
Hmm.
even when they completely disagreed with some of the expectations that people who shared their faith placed on them, right? Like,
Okay. Yeah.
they still had that relationship with God. They still wanted to pray. They still wanted that community and felt like it was a huge part of who they were. And so there was this like dance, right? Like, how do my mom and I have the same faith, but have completely different beliefs about what it means to live that faith out?
Hmm.
Um, and then like confronting the fact that if they chose to live the way they felt like they should live, they would be disappointing people, they would
Right.
be losing relationships, and not even disappointing people, but like shame. Like, they
Right.
would be shaming their family. And so that's a huge burden to carry. Um, I don't know, I
Potentially
guess,
ostracizing not only themselves but also their family from their community.
yeah, and that's something I really appreciated about this book, is like I learned a lot about Muslim culture and Islam that I hadn't known before. And it was also really interesting to me how much I could relate to these women whose like faith and cultural experience is vastly different from my own, but like these struggles are universal. And like these expectations placed on them, no, it was almost an extra layer because they are women, right?
Hmm.
And they had those expectations too. And so yeah, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so universal. I
The
will
fact that
say,
you were able to get into it and, like you said, learn more about this faith is another thing that I really like about reading. I think I mentioned it the last time we were on that, um, somebody who reads books lives 1,000 lives, whereas somebody who doesn't only lives one. The fact that you are able to take this information in and really, bring it into your brain and empathize with these characters is amazing. And it's one of the things that when people talk about representation in books and in movies and whatnot, it's not only for someone who looks like them or has a life that is similar to that, to be able to see a path forward, which is obviously a really great byproduct, but also for us as human beings to be able to look and see, okay, yeah, I can, I don't look exactly like that person. My faith isn't exactly like that person, but all of these struggles are struggles that are universal and that I have lived with and that other people in other walks of life have lived with. And, you know, the things that really bring us together as human beings.
yeah, I loved that, like, as a white woman who identifies as a Christian, I felt seen in this story about Muslim women who identify with the Islam faith. Like,
Beautiful.
it's so beautiful, and just reminded me, yeah, that we're all human. This is a human experience that we're living. And it's just through different lenses that we're experiencing all of these human things. But the last point I wanted to make is that, you know, how the women choose, like how the story ends,
Hmm.
demonstrates like the bravery that's required to choose your own path. Um, all everything that they experience over the course of the book leads them to make certain decisions for themselves. Um, that in the end, like, I don't know, you're really like proud of them,
Hmm.
like for the choices that they've made and where they find themselves, even though they might not say, like, this is where I expected to be when I was 28 or 29 years old. But Yeah, it was just a reminder that sometimes, like, it's not always easy to do the thing that seems like the simple choice, right? Like, oh, this is what you believe, this is what you value, this is what's good for you and makes you happy. Duh, you're going to do it. That it's so easy to say and to think, but it actually requires a lot of like internal strength and bravery. And as we'll see at the end of the book, community in other ways, like
Yeah,
your sisterhood and the women or other, people in your life who support you and help you remind you who you really are and validate that for you so that you have that courage to do what you know is right for you.
I would say that it is rarely as easy. I think I like to think when I'm going through these times of reflection myself and thinking like, okay, how do I get there? You just have to do it, and it's as simple as and as complicated as that. Simple to
Yeah.
say, simple to apply, but the complication comes with getting the internal and systems together to change your life, to leave the known for the unknown.
Yeah. And some not nitty gritty, but like some just book things that I really appreciated. So the
Mm-hmm.
chapters switch between perspectives of the three
I love that.
women. Yeah, I do too. And time time jumps. Like it's over a long period of time that all of this takes place. And there's a lot of exposition, which I really appreciate. So there's also great dialogue. I mean, the interactions are great, but like the internal processing that these women do, and then the description of that the narrator provides of things that are happening. In multiple times in the book, the narrator will describe like somewhere, across the ocean, this happens, and 45 minutes down the street, this is happening. And to kind of paint this picture of like, this is how different our worlds are, even though we're all in this same moment in time. Like how different place and community and where you are mentally or physically can affect what you're experiencing in any given moment. So I just think it was really well written, in addition to being a beautiful story of friendship and family and decisions that affect who you are as a person.
Well, my friend, we read similar books, it seems. I had marked this really cool quote that I think will show you exactly why this is the way it is. So it's toward the end of the book, and Maya nods, so grown up and so strong, so honest and vulnerable. Yes, Mom, it did. Your love was like organ donation. You and Dad and Leo gave me pieces of your hearts and lungs and skeletons so I could put myself back together again. And now we hardly have the strength to stand up and keep breathing yourselves. I think about that so often, and I think about all the girls who don't have you. I feel like I only just managed to survive this. How the hell does everyone who doesn't have you as their mom even stand a chance?
Mm.
So there are a lot of like big themes in the Beartown series. But just as some background, they set out this hockey town in what I imagine is a Scandinavian country, although I'm not completely positive about that. Um, and the different complications that come with living in a remote village that is very centered on this particular community activity, and the different complications that arise from that. Um, so, one of the things that I thought of as you were talking about your book is that these feelings of community are coming from multiple places. So that quote specifically is talking about a mother and a daughter and a family who really rallies around an individual. But throughout
Mm-hmm.
this book, there are also examples of children who don't have those families and who then develop chosen families that do that same thing and are willing to rally around people. One of the really cool characters and things that develops in the second two books of this series is the Bearskin, which is a pub for like it's definitely a greasy spoon kind of situation. You got a gritty old lady behind the bar who will give you sass and occasionally a beer if she wants to. And but she's also the person who takes up a collection. And when someone needs help, that collection goes to that person, whether it's to buy hockey equipment for someone or bail someone out of jail or, whatever is needed. She's sort of there and she's a big community member. So definitely these themes of community, friendship, family, and how all those different dynamics come into play and really create the environment that you're in is throughout this entire series. It's just great. Female friendship, Maya and her best friend, are like tied at the hip whenever they're together. So it definitely reminds you of like that girlfriend that you had when you were in school and you'd have sleepovers and you'd be inseparable and you like developed your own language or whatever to talk to them. Those
Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of those like blissfully simple and beautiful kid turned like she at this point in time they are maybe a year or two post their into their secondary education, so post high school, so still kind of babies, but yeah, the themes of friendship, of family, of community in general, and how those things form across different lines. Same thing in terms of religion. They unfortunately their main community forming system is going to be these hockey teams that are in different towns, and you don't talk to somebody if they play for head hockey, and head hockey people don't talk to their town hockey people. They're obnoxious, the things that you develop in those situations, and it comes together rather nicely, and I really just enjoy Frederik Bachman and most of his work. One of the things that really struck me in this book was his ability to expand and contract time. I was like halfway through the book and like 2 weeks maybe had taken place. And this is not a small book. Let me tell you how many pages are in this book here. Like 670 pages are in this book.
Wow.
Yeah. Like he literally would take you through an entire first person's experience and then mention something, and then you'll go back to the other like cast of characters to find out where they were, and then you'll go back one more time for this third person set of characters, and then you're moving on. But then while this was happening over here, this was happening. Detail, like I just nerded out as a writer appreciating another writer's intricacy. It was crazy.
Yeah. I mentioned this like on every single podcast, but I am fascinated by how authors navigate time, and how time relates to a story. So like in the book I read and just described, it takes place over what I can only assume is multiple years, but the author doesn't give dates. She uses seasons. And so when she mentions a season more than once, you realize, oh, we've made it around the calendar because we're in spring again, and the last time we were in spring. So that's the only way that all of this time has passed. But like in your story, 600 pages, like half of it is 2 weeks. Yeah. And so like how does that choice of time like relate to the specific story being told? I don't know. I think it's cool.
Yeah. And so in Frederik Bachman's case, each book is a pressure cooker. And so at the beginning that something is happening, or that there's going to be a tragic end result. And so you're just waiting this entire time as you get more and more details, and you get closer to the end of the book, and you're waiting and you're waiting and you're waiting for this thing to explode, right? What's worse is that you have an omniscient narrator who throughout the series is going to play games with you. He's going to talk about how Benji in the second book ends up like alone and sitting on the top of a roof or taking a walk in the woods, which is code in this book. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it better not happen, right? So he toys with you because he's giving you like little threads to kind of try and build upon, but it might not be exactly what you think. Um, and it's very interesting how he does that, and you're like simultaneously upset and intrigued.
Yeah.
At least I am. This is also the book, if you are a listener to all of the podcasts that I mentioned, where I sent Tiffany a voice memo after I finished it. I was distraught.
I'm sure something big happened.
Definitely, the characters unfolded and it was just crazy. I think this is the final book in the series, so I kind of expected it. And with the amount of um with the amount of pages that were in it, I was kind of just like, okay, this is gonna happen. But it's also for me, I immerse myself when I read a lot. So I read big chunks of this at a time and almost end up in their world rather than in ours. Like I'm not actually here. I'm intermittently working while living out this book.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you end up just becoming like really attached to the characters. Um, but yeah, it was an emotional morning for me, and I let it out in a weepy tech voice message to Tiffany. Poor girl.
Yes, I did receive a weepy voice memo. Shannon was very depressed and needed a moment to process the fact that this beloved character, something tragic had happened.
Like an hour or so after I sent that, my mom called me and she was wondering what I was doing that day. And I was just like, well, I just finished this book and I'm gonna need some time to process it. And she was like, you're such a flippin' weirdo. I'll talk to you later. Like people can't understand it. I'm sorry, this is who I am.
No,
Okay.
I love when characters are written so real that you get invested in their stories. I cried multiple times through the book that I just read, that These Impossible Things, because there were so many experiences that I was like, oh my gosh, like that just my heart aches for what these women are going through and for how I'm also going to say this. I did not mention it when I talked about my book, and I'm not trying to derail your description, but I feel it's important to say trigger warning for readers because the book I read does involve domestic violence, it does involve rape, and like emotional abuse as well. So if any of those are triggering to you, I might shelve this one. But anyways, continue. I want to hear more about Beartown.
There were definitely tragic themes in this, so make sure you know what you're getting into before you get into the Beartown series as well. Um, so I think I meditated most on this idea of what makes us who we are as people. Does that come from within? So I know who I am, and my actions are a manifestation of who I am. Or do our actions dictate who we are?
Mm.
So throughout the book, you have individuals who act exactly in keeping with their character, even to their detriment, which seems very practical in real life. When you see people do stupid shit, you're like, for why? And it's like, well, they have no frame of reference to do anything else.
Yeah.
Um, but then you also have people who you think you know who they are, and then maybe they act a little bit differently. Maya's best friend, for example, her dad is portrayed as a drunk the entire time, and then he has sporadic times in this third book where he is trying to stay sober for his daughter. And so you're like, oh, that's great, and it might be a little
Mm-hmm.
bit of what we were talking about before with that, actions to change, bailing on the unknown for the known and whatnot. So yeah, I thought about it a lot when I applied it to different characters in this book. I think you can definitely overcome who you are, but it's an interesting idea in terms of do I make the actions or do the actions make me?
Yeah. And even is who you are really who you are?
I
Um,
know that the idea of who I am changes pretty regularly, as I embrace different things and decide that I want different things. Um, And, you know, like for example, I talk about how when I go on trips to explore different cultures, I come back as a different version of who I am. Um, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's like a chicken and the egg kind of thing.
Mhm.
Because in that example you just gave, like who you are is dictating your action of traveling abroad,
Yep.
but the action of traveling abroad is going to affect who you are
Yep.
when you return. So, yeah.
It's an interesting thing to ponder. Um, there are times when you like you just can't help it. And I mean that's people and their habits, right? You know, if I continue to do the same thing over and over again in the split second, you know, you have no that like there's no my brain is going to act the way that I have taught it to act. Um so yeah, I've been batting it around. I don't have a really good answer. It could be any, you know, that it's not
Yeah.
one, it's like a cyclical thing. Um but I love this author for the way that he makes me think about such things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I will say that I tried to listen to another one of his books, A Man Called Ove, multiple times during the pandemic and couldn't get into it. That could have just been the time frame, but I literally have devoured each one of these books in the Beartown series, so I really can't say enough about them.
Um, that's awesome. I've seen some series pop up that I'm interested in starting, but it feels like such a commitment to read a series. I'm like, I know that you don't have to read them, one right after the other, but I saw on Instagram the other day somebody posted about this series of books. They're each titled the name of a drink. It's like old fashioned, neat, uh, and then two others. And it's the stories of four siblings in the same small town. And all the stories revolve around this distillery,
Ooh,
but they're all related. But each siblings has its book, right? Like the old
yeah,
fashioned book and their story of uh like the one thing that connects all the brothers or whatever. And so that seems fascinating to me, but I'm like, that's 4 books. That's 4 books.
yeah.
Like, I'm averaging 2 a month right now. That's 2 months worth of book reading.
I will say that when I read Beartown, I had no idea that I don't know that there was a sequel published yet. The third book definitely wasn't published, but I had no idea that there were other books in the
Mm,
series when I picked up Beartown. And then I was like, oh my God, I get to read this. Yes, please. Um, and I was all for it. So, I like those books that come from a different perspective. And if it's written right or the way that I like them to be written, you don't necessarily have to, you can start from anywhere in it, you know, without really going back
mm,
um in the order that they were written and that the characters overlap. So like you might read um about, let's say, a funeral in one person's book and it's really important to them, so they, you know, dive deeply into it, but they mention that these other characters were there, and then that's sort of like a window into that person's book where it's going to be mentioned there too, and you'll get their
mm.
experience. I like the that sort of like system. And I don't know that I would call those a series, but they're like companion books kind of situation. I guess they are a series, but um I wonder if those books are written that way, in that you don't necessarily have to read them in any particular order.
Yeah, maybe. I bet you so, because they all revolve around like the same incident and place, but it's just different retellings from their
Yeah,
personal perspective. Yeah, you're probably right.
that could be cool. Um, yeah, go read Beartown. Go read anything Frederik Bachman has written, honestly. And if it's not appealing to you in that moment, maybe it's just not the right time. Come back to it.
Yeah.
That's what I do. I don't think that there are bad books. I think that I just don't jive with a book at a particular time.
Mm.
If I've gone so far as to buy it and pick it up, there are definitely books that are just not for me. Um,
Yeah,
but
same.
But yeah, if I've picked it up and decided that I wanted to read it and it sounds intriguing to me and I just can't get into it, it's usually like that. I had that happen with another book. Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. I think it is. And I picked it up later and was totally happy with it. Well, I'm not happy with it, but I was able to finish it at a different time. Yeah, Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine. Alrighty then. Do we have anything to update from our previous episodes? I think I'm good.
I think I am too. I don't think what did I talked about last time. Oh, Alicia's book. Yeah, I don't think I have any updates. I've
I'm
already
still
started
thinking
my
about the power of regret, so
yeah,
but
girl,
nothing
you're
new
gonna
to
be thinking
report.
about that for the rest of your life.
For real. Those brain sciencey books and just like the psychology and things, I do usually end up thinking about them. Like I was thinking when you were talking about your book, about this book called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me.
Oh,
And it's all about just the paradoxes and the cognitive dissonance that we have in our heads that we will go like literally to the mat to deny or accept or whatever without really even thinking about it.
yeah,
So yeah, they provide a nice like frame of reference for life a lot.
they do.
Okay.
I I have already chosen, I've started my book for our next recording, and it's another fiction book. I think after that I might do a nonfiction. We'll see. If I find anything that I want to learn about. I don't know.
This has been a real turnaround for you.
It has. I haven't read this many fiction books in a while. Oh, or I don't know if it'll be nonfiction or if it'll be a book that's been on the shelf for a really long time that was published a long time ago. It's a classic. Madison keeps telling me to read it, and I started it a while ago but never finished it. It's a
Mm-hmm.
pretty short one. So it might be that
Gotcha.
a classic
Well, for
revisited.
our next recording, I'm finally going to talk about Spare, the Prince Harry memoir.
About
I've just
that, I've not read it, but I've watched, like I mentioned, the documentary. So
yeah, it's definitely different. And there's literally sideways snow happening outside my window.
you need a hot cup of tea and a blanket, and you've got it covered.
My teapot's already on. I don't have a blanket because I have this very comfy sweater, but
I was just thinking that, yeah, you are very cozy today.
yeah, it's my default setting. Um, oh yeah, so Spare is very different in terms of, even the Netflix special. But I've listened to it multiple times, and I say that because I probably haven't listened to it in its entirely one time around, but like I will just listen to it like as I'm going to sleep or as I'm putzing around the house. So I just pop it on and I get to hear different spots. I get to hear what's happening. Like I tune in at different spots every time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I finally have enough info to chat nicely about it. So I'm excited.
Cool. Mine is called When You Read This by Mary Adkins.
I'm
Yeah.
excited. All right, so let's wrap it up with our mental health moment. I can go first. I am going to be focusing on something I have been focusing on actually for the past couple of weeks, but it's occurred to me that there are times when I romanticize my life and I just love it all the more. So
Mhm.
being able to take a quiet afternoon where you're sitting on your couch with your book and your cup of tea and just being like, this is so romantic and fabulous and like I fucking love my life. So, I love those moments where you're just really like embracing the small, beautiful things that of the life
Mm,
that you created. So yeah, that's my mental health moment.
I love that. I'm gonna try to do that too. Um, my mental health moments. I think I don't know if there's a word I would use to describe it, but I've been writing a lot, working on my book draft, and I find myself it is constantly in my brain. There are scenes and dialogue, and I'm editing myself, and I'm thinking about how I need to change this in it because it's not strong enough, and I want to bring out this character more, and I've got to blah, blah, blah. And most of the advice I've read from published authors is like, get it all on the page and quit editing yourself as you go, because it's just going to prolong the experience. So my mental health moment is about that. I don't know what you would call that. Maybe just like ignoring my inner critic or my inner editor right now. Because there will be a
focus your creativity is what I was thinking when you said it.
Yeah, like allow it to unfold as it's going to unfold, with the knowingness that there will be a time and a place to go back and to change anything that I think needs to be changed. But just let the creativity guide the first draft without,
overthinking it. Right. There's going to be a time and place for that. Right.
Yeah.
There's going to be a time and place for that. One of the things that helps me when I'm overthinking something or whatever is if I just have like a document open, then I just brain dump everything in there so that it gets out of my head and into somewhere.
That's smart. I have a document of like words that used to be in the book that are no longer in the book. I think I posted this on Instagram yesterday, but I learned it from Hannah Brencher of like, don't ever actually delete anything, just put it somewhere else, because maybe you'll never use it and it will just collect dust there, but maybe you'll bring it back or revive it in another piece. So maybe that's where I can put the brain dump too, of just like, these are all the things that I feel like I need to do that don't need to happen right now, but I also don't want to forget them because they might be useful when I actually do revise.
Yep. It's like that scratch paper they used to give you when you were having a math test.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Instant anxiety at the thought
Sorry,
of math
I
paper
apologize. It's one of the things that they talk about when, like, in strategies for writing, where you're just gonna to just get your ass in the chair. You're just gonna write for an hour, and it doesn't matter what you write for. So you have your document open, and then you have like a journal or scratch paper, and you can write on either one of them, but your butt's in the chair for however long you wanted it to be. So that's where I got that from. I didn't mean to induce your anxiety.
Gosh, I hated math tests so much.
All right. Well, I guess we will catch you all on the flip side. In the meantime, go read more books.
Go read more books.